He found her just as the first pale light crept over the prairie, when night still clung to the grass and the world felt unfinished. The fence stretched across the land in a long, cruel line, wire humming softly in the morning wind. At first, he thought the dark shape against it was an animal caught and left to die. He approached quietly, as he always did, boots sinking into the damp earth, senses sharpened by years of solitude. Then she moved. A small sound escaped her throat, not quite a cry, not quite a breath, and he froze. She was bound upright, wrists tied high, rope biting into skin already bruised and raw. Her dress was torn, dust-stained, hanging on her like it no longer belonged to her. Strands of dark hair clung to her face, tangled and stiff with sweat. Yet when she lifted her head, her eyes locked onto his with startling force. There was terror there, yes, but also something harder, defiance sharpened by suffering. 18, he guessed, though pain had made her look both older and impossibly young. The Comanche had not spoken to another soul in many seasons. Words, unused, often stayed trapped behind his teeth. He lifted his hands slowly so she could see them, palms open, empty. The rope creaked as she shifted, testing him, wondering if this man emerging from the mist was just another ending. Her breathing came fast and shallow, like a wounded bird's. He stepped closer and saw the marks, where the rope had rubbed her skin raw, where she had struggled until strength ran out. Someone had left her here to be found by heat, by animals, or by nothing at all. The prairie was vast and indifferent. Many did not survive its silences. He pulled his knife from its sheath, not quickly, not threatening. Her body stiffened, every muscle screaming warning. He murmured a low sound, not words, just a tone meant to soothe, something he remembered his mother using with frightened horses long ago. Carefully, he sliced through the rope. It fell away in pieces, hitting the ground like shed skin. Her legs gave out at once. He caught her before she hit the dirt, surprised by how light she was, surprised by the way her body shook against his. She tried to pull away, pride fighting exhaustion, but her strength was gone. He wrapped his blanket around her shoulders, thick and smelling of smoke and earth, and eased her down to sit against the fence post. Her wrists trembled as she pulled them to her chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sun rose higher, painting the grass gold. He offered her his water skin. She stared at it, suspicion flickering across her face, then drank in small, careful sips like someone who had learned that too much hope could hurt. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and swallowed hard. "Name?" he finally asked, the word rough, unused. She flinched. Her gaze dropped to the ground. When she answered, her voice was barely there. "I don't have one." She paused, then added, quieter still, "Not one that matters." Something tightened in his chest. Names were everything to his people. A name was a place to stand in the world, a thread that tied you to the living and the dead. To be without one was to be unmoored, drifting. He studied her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way her eyes kept scanning the horizon as if expecting danger to return. She had been hurt, but she was not broken. "Not yet. You're safe," he said, slowly, choosing each word as if laying stones across a river. "I won't leave you." She looked up then, really looked at him, as if weighing the truth of his promise. The wind tugged at the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with the fragile beginnings of belief. When he helped her stand, she leaned into him despite herself. Together, they turned, away from the fence. Behind them, the ropes lay abandoned in the grass, already beginning to disappear into the land. Ahead, the prairie opened wide, and for the first time since she had been tied there, she took a step not because she was forced, but because she was free. The camp lay hidden among cottonwoods where the river bent and slowed, as if even the water knew how to rest there. He guided her carefully, matching his stride to her unsteady steps. Every few paces she stumbled, and each time she stiffened, expecting anger or impatience. None came. He only waited, steady as the land itself, until she found her balance again. By the time they reached the trees, her breathing had evened, though her eyes still carried the sharp watchfulness of someone who had learned to expect pain. He helped her sit near the fire pit, coaxing the embers back to life. Smoke curled upward, carrying the familiar scent of ash and sage. She flinched at the crackle of the flames, then forced herself to relax, hands clenched in the blanket. He poured water over crushed leaves and offered her the warm, bitter drink. She hesitated, then drank, wincing at the taste but not refusing it. Her body needed kindness even when her mind doubted it. Silence settled between them, not heavy, but cautious. He tended to her wrists with slow care, cleaning the raw skin and wrapping it with cloth torn from an old shirt. His touch was deliberate, respectful, as if he feared startling something fragile back into hiding. She watched him the entire time, memorizing his movements, the lines of his face, searching for signs of cruelty. She found none, only a quiet sadness etched deep around his eyes. When he finished, she whispered, "Why?" The word was small, but it carried everything. Why help? Why stop? Why care? He sat back on his heels and stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Because," he said slowly, "no one should be left where they were meant to disappear." His voice held the weight of old losses, of people he had once known whose names were now carried only by the wind. She swallowed and nodded, though she did not yet understand. Hunger crept into her expression, sharp and ashamed. He noticed at once and handed her dried meat and a piece of bread he had saved from the day before. She ate quickly at first, then slowed when he gently placed a hand on the food and shook his head. "Easy," he said, "you're safe here." The words felt strange in his mouth, but right. As the sun climbed, warmth seeped into her bones. The tremors in her hands eased. She leaned back against a tree, eyes fluttering closed despite her efforts to stay awake. Sleep, when it came, took her hard and fast, the kind born of exhaustion rather than peace. He watched over her without moving, listening to the river, standing guard against memories as much as dangers. When she woke, the world felt different, lighter, quieter. For a moment, panic surged as she remembered the fence, the rope, the hands that had left her there. Then she saw him, sitting a short distance away, repairing a strap, humming low and tuneless. The sound anchored her. "You asked my name," she said suddenly, her voice stronger now. "I told you I didn't have one." He nodded, turning to face her. "They took it," she continued. "Used it until it didn't feel like mine anymore." Her fingers curled into the blanket. "So I stopped answering to it." He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and came closer, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. "Then you can have another," he said. "Names can be given again. They can be earned. They can be chosen." She blinked, caught off guard. "Chosen," he nodded. "Yes, a name that doesn't hurt." He spoke one in his own language, soft and reverent. He explained its meaning slowly, carefully, as if placing something precious in her hands. "It means, dawn returns," he said. "Because even after the longest night, the light still comes back." Her breath caught. She tried the sound on her tongue, hesitant at first, then stronger. The name did not sting. It did not carry shadows. It felt new. A laugh slipped out of her before she could stop it, thin, surprised, but real. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. "I didn't think I could still do that," she whispered. He smiled, just a little. In that moment, something shifted between them. The camp was no longer just his. The fire burned warmer, and in giving her a name, he felt an old, aching emptiness inside himself ease, as if the world had quietly decided they were no longer meant to be alone. The days unfolded slowly, stitched together with small routines that built trust as surely as the river carved the prairie. She learned to move through the land with him, to notice the subtle shifts in the wind, the footprints of deer in the soft soil, the scent of rain before it fell. He showed her how to gather firewood without disturbing the earth, how to trap fish along the river bend, and how to tend the small garden he had coaxed from the stubborn soil. Every lesson came with patience, every misstep met with quiet guidance rather than scorn. And as she learned, she began to reclaim parts of herself that had been buried under fear and survival. The nights were hardest at first. Shadows stretched long and menacing across the camp, and the memory of the fence haunted her dreams. But he stayed close, always a quiet presence, listening without intruding, speaking only when needed. Often, they would sit by the fire, shoulders brushing as he hummed low tunes, telling stories of his people, of battles fought long before she was born, of stars that had guided them across plains and rivers. Slowly, she began to speak in return, not just words of need or fear, but fragments of dreams, hopes, and memories she had kept locked away. She began to recognize the land as her own in some small way, the river no longer threatening, the prairie no longer endless and empty. She discovered that she could move without constant caution, that laughter could still live in her chest, and that she could breathe without the weight of constant dread. When she stumbled or fell, he would extend a hand, not to lift her with pity but to remind her that she had strength she hadn't yet trusted. And when she rose, she did so with pride, a fragile but fierce flame that seemed to make the world itself lean closer to watch her grow. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind distant hills, painting the cottonwoods in gold and crimson, she turned to him, eyes wide and serious. "Why me?" she asked. "Why did you stay?" He considered her question, silence stretching between them, punctuated by the river's gentle murmur. Finally, he said, "Because no one should be left to vanish without a name. Because the world is too empty for one more soul to wander lost. And, because I have lived long enough to know what it is to be alone, and I could not bear for you to feel that the same way." Her lips quivered, and she reached out, hesitating, before letting her hand brush his. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, yet in it lay the acknowledgement of a bond forged through shared silence, fear, and slowly blossoming trust. The name he had given her, Dawn Returns, felt right now, not just as a word, but as a promise. A promise that the darkness behind her was no longer the only truth she had to live with. Winter came to the prairie, harsh and biting, yet it did not drive them apart. They worked together to keep the fire alive, to prepare food, to patch their small cabin against the cold wind. Nights were long, but they were never lonely. She found herself waking before him sometimes, watching the river's surface catch the first light, feeling the security of the land and the man who had shown her that it could hold her, that she could belong. In time, he built a place for her beside his own, not a cage, not a token of ownership, but a space carved carefully from the land and his heart. There was a chair by the fire for her, a corner of the cabin for her belongings, a small patch of the garden where she could plant seeds as she pleased. He never asked for her loyalty or her gratitude. Instead, he offered her freedom within his presence, and she accepted it, choosing to stay not because she had no other options, but because this was a place where she could finally be herself. And one night, as the stars scattered across the velvet sky like sparks from a fire, she whispered her gratitude, not with words but with a look and a sigh that carried everything she could not yet say aloud. He understood. Naming her had given her a place, but in giving her a home, she had given him something too, a companion for his quiet life, a future that no longer felt like an endless expanse of loneliness. The fire flickered between them, warm and steady, as the prairie settled into its night rhythms. Dawn would come again, as it always did, but now it would rise over two lives intertwined, each learning, healing, and standing together in a world that had once seemed vast and merciless. She was Dawn Returns, no longer lost, and he, once a solitary Comanche, had discovered a place where he could be whole again. And in that shared space, under the stars and beside the river, they both found what they had been seeking all along, a home.